stake in this war.
We need a military strategy for Ukraine to gain a decisive advantage on the battlefield, to win the war, and a political strategy to win the peace. To win the war, Ukraine needs more artillery, armoured vehicles and air defence. So now is the moment to double down on our military support. When Putin started this war, he gambled that our resolve would falter. Even now, he is betting that we will lose our nerve. But we proved him wrong then, and we will prove him wrong now. Together, we're delivering as much equipment in the next few months, and together, we must help Ukraine to shield its cities from Russian bombs and Iranian drones. And that's why the United Kingdom will be the first country to provide Ukraine with longer-range weapons. And it's why we're working with our allies to give Ukraine the most advanced air defence systems and build the air force they need to defend their nation.
Well, that was the British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak speaking a short while ago. Next week, Vladimir Putin is due to give an address in Moscow on Tuesday, with US President Joe Biden scheduled to give a speech in Poland on the same day. The US Vice President Kamala Harris has also been addressing the Munich conference. She spoke of unprovoked and horrendous crimes having been committed in Ukraine.
In the case of Russia's actions in Ukraine, we have examined the evidence. We know the legal standards. And there is no doubt these are crimes against humanity.
So that was Kamala Harris speaking there. Our correspondent Jenny Hill is live for us in Munich. Hello there to you, Jenny. That conference is still going on, but I wonder if you could just summarise a bit more of what we heard today.
Yes, I think today and indeed yesterday we've heard world leaders and senior diplomats lining up one after the other to express their ongoing desire to support Ukraine. You mentioned there both the British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, who said that he wants Britain to help train and equip Ukrainians' military with NATO standard weapons. He urged Ukraine's other allies to do the same. He wants them to double down on their efforts to help Ukraine not only defend itself, but he said push Russia out of its country. And by that, he appeared to mean push Russia out of Crimea, which it annexed back in 2014 to the horror of the international community. You heard too, as you mentioned there, from the US Vice President Kamala Harris. She too, I think, really wanting to emphasize that the US is willing and able to continue leading the effort to support Ukraine. And I think that's what we expected from this conference, not least because these world leaders are speaking following President Zelensky of Ukraine's address via video conference yesterday, in which he urged those gathered here to keep giving his country, his army, weapons, and to do it swiftly. But of course, what all of these leaders are having to contend with, I suppose you could condense into three dilemmas, if you want to put it that way. The first is, if they keep supplying those weapons, are they escalating this conflict? How to avoid that, how to strike that balance. The second is, what about their own public back at home? What do their voters think? Is support for this strategy starting to wane, particularly in countries really feeling the economic pinch at the moment? And thirdly, how do they keep going with that supply of weapons without depleting their own stocks to an extent which leaves their own countries vulnerable? And actually, the British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak was asked that very question by a member of the audience here, actually an officer from the Ukrainian army. And he replied that, well, you know, every time we give, say, a tank, and that tank destroys perhaps a Russian tank, or one of our missiles destroys a Russian tank, that's one less tank, which is a threat to us as a whole. But it was a very balanced answer. He also made the point that Britain's stocks need to be replenished, even as they pass on bits of military hardware to Ukraine. It is a difficult question, particularly here in Germany, actually, where the German Chancellor has urged caution in all of those dilemmas that I mentioned there. But there is a concern, particularly here in Germany, where the military has been under-resourced, under-invested in for many decades now, about just how vulnerable these donations of tanks, of weapons, of air defence systems and so on, how vulnerable that leaves these countries.
And very quickly, Jenny, China was also brought up in that question and answer session. And what was Rishi Sunak's response to that?
You'll have to forgive me because I wasn't able to hear all of Rishi Sunak's speech. I didn't hear that particular part, but China is really important at this conference. China's most senior diplomat is here, and of course you'll know that right now tensions between China and the West, in particular the US, are really heightened as a result of the US having shot down what they say was a Chinese spy balloon recently. Now, that senior diplomat said that the US's behaviour was hysterical and absurd, but China is really important here, and that's because all of these diplomats, all of these world leaders know that it does exert some not inconsiderable influence over Vladimir Putin. The economic and political ties between Russia and China have only deepened since Vladimir Putin's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. China has sat on the fence a bit. It's refused to condemn that